So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the human side of continuous improvement, building psychological safety for problem solving success. If you don't know me already, my name is Katie Lebeds. I am the president and CEO of Learning to Lean, a lean consulting firm based out of Hortonville, Wisconsin. I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and certified project management professional and emotional intelligence coach. I am an author. I've written three different books, all available on Amazon. And I have over 20 years of experience in project management, continuous improvement, leadership, and coaching. And I am so honored that you are with me here today for this session. Now, we want to make this an open session. So if you have any questions, you want any examples, we want to have any type of discussion, I strongly encourage it as we are in a safe space this morning. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about understanding psychological safety and why it matters. We're going to connect safety to problem solving effectiveness and how important that is. And we'll look at identify behaviors that build or break trust. And I have some personal examples to share with you. And we want to leave with practical applications to be able to apply these concepts immediately. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's first define what is psychological safety. So it's a shared belief that it's safe to speak up. Okay, so whether you're using your voice or you are using email or Teams chat or something like that, it is the overall belief that it's safe to be able to say something and that people feel comfortable asking questions. And if you've been in any of my classes, you know that I tell or encourage people to please ask questions because if you have that question, there's probably somebody else in the room that does too. So people feel safe in asking questions, which means they're not worried about somebody giggling when you ask a question. They're not worried about somebody responding with, well, that was a dumb question, or we've already covered that, or some sort of response showing someone's annoyance to your questions. Psychological safety also allows us to be able to have mistakes that are treated as learning opportunities. And we're going to talk about the PDCA cycle today and what I see in some occurrences at some facilities where we can't really work to finish the PDCA cycle because we don't have psychological safety. And then and focus on improvement and not blame. So if you've been with me in any of my classes, you know that I talk about it's the process, not the person. So there's three versions of a process that we typically talk about. The first version is the SOP or work instruction, right? So it's that quote unquote document, whether it is a paper document, a Word document, a video, that's the first version of a process. Now, to be honest with you, some companies or many of the companies, I'd say about 80% of the companies I work with do not have standard work. So they don't have anything that tells anyone how to do a job. The second version of the process is what it looks like in your head. Well, this is how I do this job. This is how I complete this task. And the third version is what it really looks like when we document it on a value stream map. And as you all know, those three versions so conceptually look the same. And unfortunately, in many circumstances, those three versions do not. But if you're not in a psychologically safe work environment, people are going to blame that person instead of saying, you know what, the onus is on us. We didn't create standard work. We don't have it accessible for everyone. Or maybe we've created one and or some standard work and there's thousands of different revisions or hundreds of different revisions and that person doesn't know where to go to. I was working with an organization one time and I said, do you have standard work? And they said, no. I said, well, then how do people know what they should be doing or what the proper process is for that? They said, we open the door and we tell them good luck. So again, we want to create psychological safety. And those examples I just gave you are not psychologically safe environments. So psychological safety is not being nice all the time. So many of us in here are from the Midwest, and we know something that's called Midwest nice, right? So being nice all the time does not mean it's a safe environment. So sometimes we can just be Midwest nice, and that doesn't mean that people feel comfortable asking questions. People feel comfortable asking when they don't understand a process either. Psychological safety is not avoiding accountability, right? So if you are in a situation where people are avoiding accountability, which means nobody wants to raise their hand and say, yes, I did that. I made a mistake on the shipment, or I made a mistake in VLOOKUP in Excel, which I'll tell you, so many people ask me about how to do that. That's not a safe environment either. Psychological safety is not about lowering standards. So we don't lower standards in order to make things happen. And psychological safety is not about eliminating tough conversations. And I can tell you in my professional career, I've had circumstances where I've had people that have worked for me where I had direct reports of about 25 people and indirect reports of 100 people. And I've had smaller groups where I've had 5 people. And unfortunately, in all of those circumstances, we have to have those tough conversations, right? So psychological safety is not about saying we don't have those tough conversations. It is about we are having those tough conversations in a manner in which it is effective, in a manner in which is respectful, in a manner in which we still allow people to feel safe. So safety is not comfort, and that's something that we have to make sure that we understand. It's permission to be honest and learn from mistakes. Okay, so psychological safety is not about being comfortable. It's permission to be honest and learn from our mistakes. And let's face it, we can apply this at work or at home too. So let's look at this where signs that safety is low. So there is not a lot of psychological safety. Silence in meetings or having only one person talking. So I have seen that in multiple circumstances. I was teaching a couple weeks ago to an organization, and every time I asked a question, I had one person answering, and that person was considered a leader or a manager in the organization. And I said, "Does anybody else have anything to say?" Right? Because you could tell they all looked to this person when I asked a question like, what is that person going to say? What's going to be his response? So when psychological safety is low, we see circumstances like that where you can tell, or maybe I can just tell because I've taught so many people that somebody wants to say something, but they're hesitant because of who's in the room. Blame and finger pointing. So when safety is low, we see blame and finger pointing. It's his fault or it's her fault, or I wasn't told that, or not given enough time to do this. Not saying that they don't understand, because of course they wouldn't feel safe in saying that. Hidden mistakes or workarounds. In class, we often talk about emotional bias in data. So hidden mistakes or workaround come out in emotional bias in data. Now, what does that mean? That means when I ask to see, can I see the performance of the organization over time? Can I see the effectiveness or labor efficiency or even on-time delivery? We don't even have to be that sophisticated. You are going to see hidden mistakes or workarounds or emotional bias where people only show me the good looking data and won't show me anything else because they don't want to quote unquote get in trouble with anyone. Uh, Sometimes we see this as multiple Excel files. I see this quite often in certain departments. Sometimes in finance, I'll see this where we have Excel files upon Excel files because they don't trust the system. They're afraid to make a mistake, and I always tell people they call it my precious, right? So they're holding on to their Excel file for their life. And they'll have those workarounds because they don't trust the system or because they don't want to be viewed as somebody that is quote unquote disposable, right? Well, if I didn't do these Excel files, what would I do? And that's just not the case. We always talk about when we improve a process and we add more value, if that means that somebody doesn't have to do this part of their job anymore, we will find work where they can add more value within the organization. And then sometimes we will also see when safety is low, few improvement ideas submitted. So you will hear things like, this is just a joke. right? I'm not submitting anything, right? They're trying to trap me, or nothing will ever change. Why should we even bother with this? This is the fourth or fifth or sixth time we've tried to do lean within the organization. I'm not submitting anything unless they make me. And you will also hear, well, if they make me, I'm going to submit X, Y, or Z, like we should change the toilet paper in the bathrooms, or we should do X, Y, or Z, which are not really process improvement. It's just a way for somebody to say, well, I submitted the idea and nobody took it upon themselves to do that, right? And that's why also within organizations, when you're doing continuous improvement, I've had companies come to me and say, I know what we're going to do first. We're so excited about this. We're going to put up a suggestion box. And I always tell people that's great as long as you have a process that surrounds it. And I had a company that I was working with, and they told me about their failed suggestion box process. So what happened was they had a box or proverbial box, whether it was an email box or a physical box, where they had people put in suggestions for continuous improvement. And the process was they reviewed those on a routine basis. And if your suggestion wasn't approved, they would write a letter. So they would type out a letter, put it on the printer, and they would wait till you've left your desk. And then they would place this letter on your desk when you were away. And what the organization started calling it was the loser letter. So they would get this loser letter, which said, your idea wasn't approved. Thanks for submitting. And they wouldn't do that face to face. They would wait till somebody stepped away from their desk for lunch or to the run to the restroom, and they'd come back to this surprise of a loser letter. So again, that signs that psychological safety is low. If you're going to have a suggestion box, you need a process that surrounds it. And that means a process for review and a process for telling people your idea was accepted or your idea was not accepted. And you need to be able to make those tough calls when somebody puts in a suggestion and you're like, it's just not right for the organization right now. Psychological safety is low. I wanted to share some personal examples with you. I worked for a company that their quality policy that was posted on the walls of every conference room said that we will meet the demands of our customer or die trying. Die trying, right? That does not institute psychological safety in an organization. You aren't going to want to make a mistake in that company. Let's look at signs that safety is high. So signs that safety is high. Open discussion of problems. Okay, so if you are in an area or in a company, now keep in mind, you can have a culture within an organization. You can say this is our company culture, but every department within that organization can have a different culture and different levels of psychological safety. So sometimes we have to look at it as what is the culture in IT versus what is the culture of the entire organization. So psychological safety is high. We have open discussion of problems. And we have experimentation and learning for the full PDCA cycle. Now, what am I talking about? Sometimes I go to companies and they will follow PDCA like this: plan, spend time in planning. Remember, 50% of your time should be spent in planning. They'll go to the do step, they'll implement the change, they'll go to the check step, and they'll find out that what they did not solve the problem, or it actually made it worse. And the next step is not act for them. The next step is freeze, because they're like, oh my gosh, we made a mistake. Never mind. And they just want to put their head down or head in the sand and be like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. If your psychological safety is high, it's not that big of a deal within the organization. You say, this is what we learned. Here's our data to prove it. And this is what we're going to do in our next iteration of PDCA. So when you have low psychological safety, it's plan, do, check, freeze. When you have high psychological safety, you have plan, do, check, act. And shared ownership of results. Now, what does that mean? That means that we say that we, as an organization, were successful doing this, not I, as a leader, was successful. My husband says that all the time. He'll say, "We did this." I'm like, "Honey, you're the one that installed that light. He just installed the light in the barn, and it's really helpful for us." And he'll say to somebody, "Yeah, we installed this new light." He always says we. He doesn't say I installed it. And I certainly didn't help him with the install because he did it while I was at work. But again, he's trying to provide psychological safety. So let's look at the impact on problem solving when safety is high. So when people feel that safety is high, so going back to this, signs safety would be high in your organization. This is the impact on problem solving. So we have improved root cause analysis. So we are resolving problems permanently and even potentially faster, right? Because that PDCA cycle can go faster without having to freeze, right? So that is a benefit of when we have high psychological safety. We also will use data to drive and make decisions. And remember, we want quantitative data. So we want data that we can do math with. So you will see people asking questions like, what problem are you trying to solve? And what data do you have to support the problem when psychological safety is high? We have faster learning cycles. You may have heard online or at organizations, companies have said, we want to fail faster, right? So that just means we want to find out what works fast and get to the end point, get to the root cause faster, right? Let's go through this and let's be able to say, hey, you know what? This didn't work. On to the next thing. And what I would suggest is just to make sure don't go too fast. Make sure you have documented what you've tried along the way. And that's really a great opportunity also. So let's document what did and did not work. And then stronger team alignment. So when psychological safety is high, people feel more comfortable working on a team, even if those team members' ideas are different from yours or opinions are different from yours. It's not that big of a deal in a place that has psychological safety. Now, how do we build it, right? And we've all heard the phrase, if you build it, they will come. Absolutely. People want to work in a psychologically safe environment. So, how do we make one? So, leadership behaviors that build safety, and again, anyone in your organization, regardless of their title, can be considered a leader. It's okay to admit when you don't know the answers, and some people really struggle with that. One of the phrases that I use is, "I'll get back to you on that." I don't know. And how over time I have learned that it's okay to say, I don't know. Let me look into that for you, right? But be the type of leader that is committed to get back that information for them. Don't be the parent, right? We've all been through it, right? You've asked your mom and dad, hey, can we go out to dinner tonight? And they'll say, we'll see. We all know we'll see is code word for no, right? So don't let I'll get back to you be code word for I'm never getting back to you. Follow through on that. Ask open-ended questions, right? So ask open-ended questions, which means we are not looking for a yes or no answer, right? So as an example, this morning, my dad has a cold right now, and my dad has Alzheimer's, so it makes it even worse. And so I sent a text to my mom this morning, and I rephrased my question. I was going to type, is dad feeling better this morning? Well, that's not an open-ended question, right? That's a yes or no answer. So I wrote back, erased that and said, how is dad feeling this morning? Have are we seeing any improvement in his cough or fever, et cetera? So you want more data or more open-ended question, right? So not a yes or no answer. And sometimes it takes you a couple minutes to rewrite that even in your head. Thank people for raising issues. Hey, thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. I didn't think about that as a risk, right? And we talk about risk in continuous improvement and project management. You want to thank people for bringing up something that maybe that's just your blind side and you cannot see that. Thank them for being able to bring that up. and respond with curiosity, not judgment. So, one phrase that you can use is, can you tell me more about that? Can you give me some examples? Right? So, can you tell me more about that is an open-ended question. Can you give me some examples? In general, would be an open-ended question unless they just said yes or no and didn't say anything else. So, again, respond with curiosity. You may be thinking in your head, this is absolutely ridiculous. But I challenge you to think about it in a different way and just listen, right? And Stephen Covey has a phrase that I'll paraphrase right now. And he talks about the fact that when we're not listening, when people are communicating to us, we're not listening to understand, we're listening to respond. So we have already jumped to the conclusion, right? We've already gone to the book and gone to the end when somebody's trying to talk to us. So we want to respond with curiosity, which means we're paying attention, not judgment. And one of the things that I was always very conscientious in regards to having one-on-ones with my team members. One thing that drives me nuts, and it's from when I was a little kid too, is when I'm trying to talk to somebody and they're looking at their computer. You can tell they're reading emails, they're not paying attention to what I'm saying. I will give you a personal example of bad leadership that did not build safety. I was presenting to a vice president of an organization. He personally had asked for me to come in and present this supply chain information to him. This was many years ago. And it was just me and this gentleman. I think there was one other person in the room. So I'm giving my presentation. And as you can imagine, I mean, this was, I'd say 15 years ago. I was a little nerve-wracking, right? I didn't work a lot with this gentleman, and he was, one of the top three in the company. So I was a little nervous about the presentation, but I had prepared well and I was ready. Halfway through the presentation, his phone rang. And of course, was it on silent? No, it wasn't. He picked it up and started talking to the person on the phone while I was doing the presentation. And then he looked at me as he's on the phone like this. He looked at me and he goes, like, continue. And I looked at him and I said, no, I'll wait. And I waited for him to complete his conversation. And then I continued with my presentation. I came back and told my boss, and he said, you told him you would wait? And I said, yes, it's his dime, not mine. He's the one that asked for me to present. He can't possibly listen to what I'm saying and what that person on the phone was saying. And what was so important that he had to absolutely answer the phone while I was giving him a presentation that he asked for. Again, that's not psychological safety. So that leads us into behaviors that break safety. So, what behaviors can leaders have, like that one, that break psychological safety? Interrupting or dismissing ideas. We've tried that before. Now, again, it could be anybody as a leader in an organization. We've tried that before. We did that 20 years ago and it didn't work. Well, that was 20 years ago. A lot of change. A lot has changed in 20 years. Some people in the room might not even have been alive 20 years ago. Or interrupting, right? Uh, and sometimes you have to give people grace if we're doing video calls, right? Sometimes it's really hard to be able to understand if that person is taking a breath or pausing or what's happening before we jump right in. Now, video calls or conference calls, that can sometimes there's some sort of delay and weird things start to happen. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about purposely interrupting. Blaming individuals for system issues, right? So they're blaming people instead of process. So some individuals really feel strongly that they need to have one throat to choke. So one person in particular that they need to proverbially choke and blame for the issue. Punishing mistakes without learning. So this is a prime example. So let's pretend that you are managing a group of 20, 25 people, and you have one person that comes in late all the time, and you're trying to coach them through this. Now, instead of dealing and coaching with them or doing it one-on-one, you email everyone about the situation. Being late to work will not be tolerated. 3 times that you are late to work, then you're fired. That email is not the way to respond to that situation, right? So those situations should be handled one-on-one, not emailing everybody about one particular situation with one particular person and saying, you better all not be doing that, or ignoring feedback, right? So people have told you you come off gruff or you come off with unapproachable, right? Early on in my career, I was told, "Hey, you have a resting face," and I do when I'm concentrating, and I know that. And so I try to make sure that when I was in an office environment and I was concentrating really hard, normally my head down or looking at a computer, if somebody came in, I made sure that I looked up and smiled, right? But I get so engrossed in thought that I'm not being grumpy. I am just concentrating. And I've had to learn over time that I just need to be careful and watch what my face is doing. So learning leadership behaviors that break safety. This is my own life examples I wanted to share with folks, not quote unquote allowing anyone else to sit in the leader's seat in a meeting. It was very well known in an organization that I worked in. When you came in, you didn't sit in that person's seat. That is not a psychologically safe environment. Being told to sit to the side during a meeting because you aren't a manager in title. That happened to me personally. I was in a meeting with our leadership team and then our CIO and CEO of the company in a small meeting room. And my first time going into this meeting, and I was not a director, I was a manager. And my boss literally told me to sit in the corner because I wasn't the appropriate level to sit at the big boy table. During your annual review, comment that states that you're the mother of the department. That happened to me also. As you can imagine, I've been in psychologically unsafe and psychologically safe environments. So how do I handle these situations, right? It's fine for me to list them here and say, look what bad things happened to me. Uh, the seat in the meeting, the first bullet point, there's not much you can do. Being told to sit on the side in that meeting, I scooted my chair up to the table, and the one person that was a very nice, kind person scooted over, so I had a seat at the table. And he was welcoming, was not my boss, but he was welcoming and said, "Of course, come please sit here." And then your annual review in the comment, that comment from my boss, to be honest, ended up going to HR because it was an inappropriate comment. So that's how I handled it. Did it change the psychological safety of the environment? No, it did not. So practical tools though to encourage safety. So this is what I wish that would have been done at the places that I worked at to encourage safety, daily stand-ups. So these are the things that I did to encourage psychological safety on my own team, even though it wasn't always necessarily done for me. So we have daily stand-ups. And if you've been in any of my classes or heard me speak, I can't express enough the value of a daily stand-up, which is a 15-minute check-in. Number one, this is not micromanaging. This is a check-in, 15 minutes each day to see what's going on. And really, it is a servant leadership mentality when you are there to say, how can I help you? Tell me what's going on and how can I help? Check-ins. So this is normally what we did at the end of our meetings. This is my take on agile methodology Fist of Five. So if you have ever been in an agile environment or read about it, they do this activity called Fist of Five, and it has to do with the ability for them to be able to work on items in a 2-week sprint. But I changed this for my teams. So on my teams, I said, okay, this is our check-in, and I want to know how you're feeling and your workload. So kind of that combination of those two for the day. Or if we don't do daily stand-ups, maybe it was a team meeting once a week. So one meant I was bored. So if I saw one from somebody that I knew that that person was bored, what they had wasn't challenging for them, or they didn't have enough of it. When did that happen? It occasionally happened when somebody was new to the team, right? So maybe this was their first week or their second week. They weren't overwhelmed yet. They were just trying to figure things out. And as any of us know, sometimes those first couple weeks, you have to do some standard training, and it's really not the lifeblood of the job. So And then they had a range. So one was bored, five was overwhelmed or stressed. You have too much going on, there's too much work, or too many deadlines, or something of that nature. Now, we had no judgment on what anybody else felt. Now, the cool part about this was every time I've done this with a group of people, somebody that came up and said, I'm a five, somebody else in the room that said that they were a two or a three went up to them during the meeting and said, how can I help you? I didn't have to say anything, and I never asked for that. People on the team took that upon themselves to help others, which I thought was extraordinarily powerful. And again, it gives us a quantitative analysis for how people were feeling or their workload. User structured problem solving. So a lot of companies I work with use PDCA. Some companies use an A3, which is a problem solving methodology. Both are great problem solving methodologies as long as you continue to support it. And then Kanban boards for transparency. So Kanban in itself means signal, and a Kanban board helps to display the status of work. And you can Google them. You're going to see to do, doing, done. I've used these in multiple occurrences and multiple occasions. And this allows us to get a quick glance about workload and what's happening. So I use this with a project management organization, and we used our Kanban board. We had our project management lifecycle at the top and people's name on the left. And then those Post-it notes were actually project numbers and names. And then we had a red, yellow, green status for each of those. So every day in our daily stand-up, we reviewed the Kanban board. And again, it was this great visual to be able to say, this is where everything is. This is what people's workload looks like. And we also had a column for escalate. So if they needed help and they wanted to be able to ask me in that manner, they could put their card for their project in the escalate column. And I had 24 hours to help fix that problem, whatever it was. And if not, it was then escalated to my boss. So I will always toot the horn for a Kanban board. And again, daily stand-ups and check-ins, this is all part of that activity. And then retrospectives and reflection, or in Japanese, they call it Hansei. So making sure that you are giving people time to reflect. You're giving people time to, whether you call it lessons learned or reflections or retrospectives or Hansei, right? It's a moment in time to stop and reflect, right? And say, how should we start? What should we stop? And what should we continue? Another example for a 5-minute reflection activity besides start, stop, continue is to ask this question: what problem are we avoiding? And what we're trying to do in this 5-minute reflection is encourage leaders to model vulnerability and curiosity. So, what problem are we avoiding? What would happen if we talked about it? Now, again, you could be doing this as a team in silent reflection, right? Where it depends on your team. You have to know your audience. You have to know the situation. If you're new to an organization or a department, you might not know the level of psychological safety, so you might not get people answering these questions verbally. Ask them, so what problem are we avoiding? What would happen if we talked about it? Who needs to be involved? And what small experiment could we try? Right? So again, I always encourage people, let's just try, right? Let's just try and see what happens. What's the worst thing that could happen, right? We can always go back to the way we used to do it. So let's just try and see. And keep in mind, let's just try. Maybe we try it today, or we try it for a week, or we have to try it for a few weeks or even a month. It depends on the process, it depends on the cadence, etc. So some key takeaways from today's session is that continuous improvement is it's people systems, not just a tool set, right? So making sure that we understand emotional intelligence in people, that we understand that change can be hard and CI is driving change in an organization. We have to be able to make sure that people feel seen and heard when we're working through this. Safety accelerates learning and results. So if people feel safe in an environment, they're going to want to learn. They're going to want to make changes because they know, like I've always told them, I've got you if you fall. I'm here. I will be there if something happens. I will be there to catch you if you fall. Don't worry. And then being able to hold up to that. Small leadership behaviors make a big impact. Uh, it, for example, if you have been told, hey, you have a tendency to interrupt people, then maybe just try not to do that, right? Try to take a moment. Sometimes they think people interrupt because they're worried they're going to lose their train of thought. And I certainly get that way too, right? You're so excited or you're so passionate about something, you're like, oh my gosh, if I don't say this, I'm going to lose my train of thought. I would strongly encourage, and there's lots of recent studies about writing things down. So I really encourage you to write it down. So bring a pen and paper or on my phone, though I'm not keen on using the phone when somebody else is talking. I have the ability to take a note, right? So this is Samsung Galaxy. So I can write on here just like it was a notepad in my own handwriting. So sometimes I'll do that when somebody's talking, if I, for some reason, don't have a pen and paper, or if you have to type. But sometimes, again, just that small, if you've been told or you know that you interrupt, the small act of trying to get better on that can make a big impact. And improvement sticks when people feel safe. So if they realize that everything's going to be okay, that I have you, right? And it just, in my mind, the picture that comes up is when you learn how to ride a two-wheel bicycle, right? And your parent or family member or whoever has the back seat of your bike, right? I remember when my dad taught us, right? And my dad, I'm sure he probably lost like 20 pounds running around behind us, right? Our driveway was in a steep incline, but luckily we lived on a circle. So we lived on a court. So luckily dad could just like run by two houses to get us into the court, right? We had no sidewalks. But that's what we mean, where, there's that safety that that somebody's going to be there to hold on to you until they have more confidence in you than you do in yourself and they let go. So, your next steps. Observe team interactions this coming week. So TGIF, but observe team interactions this coming week, and choose one safety building behavior to practice, right? So whether it's listening, it's asking open-ended questions, or admitting you don't know, but you'll find out. Encourage one improvement conversation, right? So have that one improvement conversation, either with somebody that works with you or for you, or who you work for, right? And saying, how can I get better at this? And then continue learning through training and Kaizen events. Kaizen events are just a miraculous event in which it allows us to drive improvement in a rapid fashion. And it's fantastic because we're like, thank goodness we are solving this problem. But it's also a lot of change all at one time. So you want to create an environment where you know that people will be heard, that you make sure that they feel safe, and that following PDCA is encouraged. So that's it for our session on CI and psychological safety today. I appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. We offer lean and continuous improvement and Six Sigma training, anywhere from white belt, yellow belt, green belt, and black belt. We offer a Lean for Leaders training, which is providing a 4-hour overview for leaders so that they have a high level understanding of lean and continuous improvement. Of course, we have Kaizen events and we have project management training, root cause analysis, etc. So we have standard training and then we have training we can customize for you in any industry that you're in, from agriculture to healthcare, HR, IT to manufacturing, and everything in between. We help you drive revolutionary results. Thanks for being here today. If you have any questions, just let me know.